Very common saying in the world of Bitcoin is to stay humble and stack Bitcoin. Or more specifically, people say stay humble and stack sats. Sats are Satoshis, which is the smallest unit of Bitcoin, but it means the same thing. And since the concept of Satoshis confuses people unnecessarily, I'm just going to call it stay humble and stack Bitcoin, which is the same thing. Okay, so what does it mean when people say that? Well, they say that because everybody who stops being humble about stacking Bitcoin usually somehow finds a way to lose their Bitcoin. So if you'll sort of think back on the last 16 years of Bitcoin, you realize, well, Bitcoin does not have a CEO. It doesn't have a leader. It's what's called a decentralized project, which means basically everybody's in charge and nobody's in charge at the same time. But at various points, some people have decided to not stay humble and stack Bitcoin, and instead started thinking that they got too big for their britches. And invariably, whoever got too big for their britches and started thinking of themselves as the CEO of Bitcoin or not subject to the laws of Bitcoin because they were going to, fly too close to the sun, then inevitably come crashing down. So in the early days, those people were software developers. Gavin Andresen, Mike Hearn, and some of the very early software developers started getting too big for their britches. They started thinking about Bitcoin as their project rather than a project for the world. And they started thinking that all of the other software developers should follow them instead of follow the decentralized ethos of Bitcoin, which is everybody can contribute to Bitcoin. Nobody's in charge of Bitcoin, and we all win, with Bitcoin together. So Gavin Andresen, Mike Hearn, and people like that basically started trying to take control of the Bitcoin project and invariably ended up with no Bitcoin. I don't know about Gavin Andresen, but at one point, Mike Hearn got so frustrated that in 2014, he sold all of his Bitcoin and said, I'm out. I've sold all of my Bitcoin. This thing is a failed experiment because people would not follow him. Well, obviously, that was when Bitcoin was like, you know, I don't know. I don't know if it was $50 or $100 or $200, but some ridiculously small percentage of today's value. And he missed out on the vast, vast, vast. He could have made hundreds of times as much money if he had just stuck with it, stayed humble, and stacked Bitcoin. But he didn't. He got frustrated because people didn't want to follow his way of doing things. And, he got fed up with it and he said, I'm taking my ball and going home. Well, he took his ball and went home, and the game got a lot more fun to play for everybody else who ended up with way more Bitcoin. So the same thing happened later with people like Roger Ver, V-E-R, Roger Ver or Roger Ver, with the block size wars in 2017. Roger Ver started feeling like, and others started feeling like they controlled Bitcoin, that the rules of Bitcoin should go in the direction they preferred, which involved very minor and very technical changes to how Bitcoin worked. And they got so frustrated that they launched their own version of Bitcoin called Bitcoin Cash that trades under the ticker BCH instead of BTC. So the real Bitcoin is BTC. BCH is basically a knockoff that was backed by Gavin Andresen and Roger Ver and a variety of other people. Anyway, they got so big for their britches that they were positive that they could tell the world what Bitcoin was, and Roger Ver had registered Bitcoin.com. So when Bitcoin was launched, Satoshi Nakamoto tried to get Bitcoin.com, but it was already registered by somebody who was just, registering a gazillion, names and sitting on them. So Bitcoin.com was not available. So Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin, who nobody knows who that is because he did stay humble. Nobody knows who that is. So he registered Bitcoin.org. Well, Roger Ver, because he did not care about his anonymity, he did not care if people knew who he was. One second. So because Roger Ver did not care if people know who he was, he went and bought the Bitcoin.com domain name, which again, Satoshi Nakamoto himself could not do that because there was no way to buy that domain name and stay anonymous, which is why the official Bitcoin website is bitcoin.org and not bitcoin.com. So Roger Ver went and bought bitcoin.com, and in the block size wars in between 2015 and 2017, he used bitcoin.com to promote his vision of Bitcoin. And ultimately, when his vision of Bitcoin, which became known as Bitcoin Cash, BCH. When they launched it, he sold at one point. Roger Ver owned something like 400,000 Bitcoin, um, which today would make him, close to the richest person in the world. So, but instead of staying humble and stacking Bitcoin, he could have just sat on 400,000 Bitcoin and he would have turned into the richest guy in the world. But he did not do that. Or actually, Bitcoin, I guess right now he would not be the richest, but if Bitcoin hit $1 million per coin, he would be the richest person in the world. Right now he'd have a net worth of like 40 billion or, 30, whatever, 37 billion, something like that. But anyway, Roger Ver was not humble and did not stack Bitcoin. So he sold most or all, a huge percentage of his Bitcoin. He sold in order to buy his version called Bitcoin Cash. So his thought was, his version was going to win and he was going to sell the real Bitcoin for a different version that would become a real thing. Well, that version is still out there. You can still look it up under the ticker symbol BCH, and it trades at 1/300th of the price of Bitcoin. So for every $1 million that Roger Ver has today in Bitcoin Cash, he could have $300 million of the real Bitcoin. And Bitcoin Cash is basically a ghost town. It's been slowly dying ever since 2017. It used to trade at 1% of Bitcoin, and then it traded at half of 1% of Bitcoin, and now it trades at 1/3 of 1% of Bitcoin, and it'll eventually just go to zero, and all the money that Roger Ver had in Bitcoin Cash will be worthless because he got too big for his britches. He did not stay humble and stack Bitcoin. So this has happened to a bunch of people over the last 16 years. Every time someone started thinking of themselves as in charge of Bitcoin, or the CEO of Bitcoin, or people started getting frustrated because nobody would follow their vision of what Bitcoin should be or how it should work or anything like that, those people ended up getting parted with their Bitcoin and ultimately ended up with either no Bitcoin or radically, radically, radically less than they have right now. So right now, the biggest name in Bitcoin is Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor is a relatively humble guy. He has done a fantastic job of stacking Bitcoin because his company owns about 500,000 Bitcoin right now. It's actually 499,000. So MicroStrategy, which recently renamed the company to Strategy, Michael Saylor renamed the company to Strategy, um, now owns 499,000 Bitcoin, valued at about 40 some billion dollars, and he owns 46% of the company, which means he owns 46% of that Bitcoin, minus they have about $8 billion of debt. So they do have to pay off the debt. But other than the debt, he owns 46% of the shares, and so he's owns 46% of the rest of it. So I absolutely wish Michael Saylor well. He's done an incredible job of evangelizing Bitcoin. He is a genius. He understands Bitcoin probably better than anyone else in the world. But he does have $8 billion in debt that he's taken out to buy more Bitcoin. And part of me wonders, is he staying humble? Is he stacking? He's certainly stacking Bitcoin. There's no doubt about that. The guy is stacking Bitcoin like an animal. The question is he staying humble? And I don't know. I don't know him personally. I hope he's staying humble. History would predict that at the point at which he stops being humble, something bad will happen to him or to his Bitcoin, because that has universally been the case. Every time somebody stopped being humble, something bad happened to them or to their Bitcoin. So the universal rule there: stay humble, stack Bitcoin. If at any point anything I post on Facebook sounds like I'm not being humble or I'm not stacking Bitcoin, let me know. I want to be humble and stack Bitcoin. I do not want to be humbled by Bitcoin. I want to be a humble holder of Bitcoin because it's way more fun to be a humble holder of Bitcoin than to be humbled Bitcoin. and there's a very long list of people who got humbled by Bitcoin because they got too big for their britches. They started thinking they were in charge. They started getting annoyed that people wouldn't do what they wanted. They started thinking that the rules that applied to everybody else did not apply to them. And inevitably, they got parted with their Bitcoin or ended up somehow with way less of their Bitcoin. So stay humble, stack as much Bitcoin as you possibly can, and stay humble, humble, humble in the process. And anyway, stay humble, stack Bitcoin. That is the only way to success. And everybody who has forgot to stay humble or to stack Bitcoin has ended up being humbled by Bitcoin. And the same will happen to you or me if we don't stay humble and stack Bitcoin. Have a great day, everyone.